Listen to these words from Matthew's Gospel. From Jesus, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person will receive the reward of the righteous. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones in the name of a disciple, truly I tell you, none of these will lose their reward." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is a parable about music and welcome. Once upon a time, a little imagination turned emptiness into life abundant. A vacant corner lot in a grimy urban neighborhood was transformed into a community center. The owner of the lot, the builder of the establishment, wanted to redeem that little plot of land, converting it from an empty space, an eyesore really, into some place useful, even enjoyable. A place where people could gather to eat and drink and to dance and to laugh, to share one another's good news, and to support one another when the news wasn't so good. It was a risk, a great risk. This club, as she called it, would be either a sign of uncommon hope for a neighborhood yearning for a breath of fresh air, or it would be a terrible disappointment for its moving force, a woman known to the locals as Ted. "My name's Theodora, but for heaven's sakes, call me Ted," she would say to people, offering a hug instead of a handshake. No one could remember a time when Ted wasn't around. No one could remember exactly where she'd come from originally. She appeared to be a woman of some means, as out of place in that neighborhood as a Subaru Outback. And yet she was so rooted to that section of the city, its rundown row houses and its unpaved alleys, its crooked porches and its overgrown yards. She was a fixture there somehow. Yet beyond it all, if she'd been a curiosity at one time, now she was simply a neighbor. And nobody was surprised when she invested all she had in that corner lot. She hired a contractor, got a crew, and she built this club. I called it a community center, but it was really, if truth be told, a bar and grill. Nothing fancy, but considering how barren the lot had been for all those years, a roof over 4 sturdy, freshly painted walls, some tables and chairs, an adequate kitchen, even some space for dancing, and the piece de resistance for Ted was a bright neon sign in the massive front window. Well, the whole place was something special, a breath of fresh air, Mamie Warfield called it. "It's about time we had something new around here," she said to no one in particular as she opened the doors for the first time and came into Ted's place. Mamie's husband, Dan, said he'd forgotten what fresh paint smelled like. As Dan entered, he sniffed at the walls. As he seated himself at the table, he sniffed at the new red and white checked tablecloth. He picked up the mimeographed menu, and like we all do, he sniffed at that too, prompting Mamie to whisper gruffly, "Oh, stop it. You're acting like an old hunting dog. People think I married a beagle." That first day, half the neighborhood came to Ted's place. She knew the other half knew the place was there because that bright red neon sign that flashed, "Your place, your place, your place," in fancy script letters. The sign was about the only thing that glowed in that section of the city, except for the occasional porch light that kept the streets from total darkness at night. Ted was glad to see so many people come in and look around, even if they didn't order anything or stay for more than a minute or two. Curious, they'll be back, she told herself, and others will come. This will work, I know it will. I've done a good thing here. Word about your place spread into other neighborhoods, and business picked up. But the third night it was open. 3 men got into a fight. Someone stole some silverware, and a towel rack was torn off a restroom wall. Undaunted, Ted told herself these things were bound to happen now and then. The next night, another fight broke out and more damage was done, and the next day, Mamie Warfield told Ted that she and her husband were afraid to come back. This must work, Ted insisted, and she posted some rules. Some folks just need to be reminded of how to behave, she told Mamie. Just about closing the next night, somebody threw something and they broke Ted's neon sign. And there was one less light in the neighborhood that night. Clearly, this was not the way Ted had envisioned her club. She had imagined people gathering for community and fellowship and sitting at tables and maybe telling stories. She made sure there was no TV in the place. She hoped for laughter, not for anger. She was saddened by the violence she witnessed, and she was disappointed and she was frustrated. She swept up the broken pieces of that tubing that had been her sign, and she wondered if she'd have the resources to replace it, or the will. They can break my sign, but they won't break my spirit, she finally said with jaw set and heart determined. The next day, after ordering enough food for 2 or 3 days worth of lunches and dinners, afraid to commit much beyond that, she walked down the street to the Warfields' old house. She went up the walk to their front steps and climbed the first step and then the second one and then skipped over the third, which had been broken since Mamie Warfield had taught Ted piano lessons 12 years before. Ted knocked at the door. When she told Mamie her idea, Mamie beamed. Well, it'll be some trouble, I guess, but it's worth a try. Dan can come get some help and we'll get it taken care of. Don't you worry. So Ted hugged her and said, I know this is a real sacrifice for you, and I hate to ask it, but I have to try it. Ted didn't open for lunch that day. The club's first music arrived early that afternoon. A borrowed, tired truck delivered the Warfields' borrowed, tired piano. And with great huffing and puffing and grunting and groaning, Dan and his helpers managed to push the instrument into its new home, and Ted rewarded them with iced tea. No little disappointment for Ted's friends who were hoping for something a little bit stronger. More huffing and puffing on the way out, and the men were gone. And at the door was Mamie. Come on, Mamie, you play the first song. Teddy, I'll play so long as nobody's here to listen, but you know my recital days are over. Mamie then realized that for all their huffing and puffing, the men had forgotten to bring over her piano bench. So she smiled at Ted and she rolled her eyes and sighed and pulled over a chair. Ted knew that Mamie would play Amazing Grace. It was the first piece that she had heard coming through the Warfield house years before. She remembered standing on the sidewalk in front of their house, awed by the devotion and the faith that she heard through the sound of a piano way out of tune. And when Mamie had finished playing that day so long ago, Ted had bolted up those steps, jumping over that third one, called through the battered screen door, "Will you teach me to play like that?" "Who's listening to my time with the Lord?" Mamie called out through the door, the closed screen door. "It's me, Ted. Well, I'm going to pray one more hymn, and then you come in and we'll see about a lesson or two." Ted stood at the door, patiently and reverently. Of course, years had passed. Ted had moved beyond Mamie's lessons, had studied the classics, and had played for fun. She'd mastered Debussy and Ellington, Joplin and Chopin, as they said back then, Chopin. But now here she was, listening to Mamie's inspired interpretation of this old American folk tune with lyrics that one could not help but hear through the untuned instrument played by crippled fingers. How sweet the sound. As the hymn ended, Mamie remarked about how different the piano sounded outside her living room. And then she smiled and said, "It's a good thing the Lord's grace taught my heart to sing, because even his grace would have a tough time making this old piano sound worthy of his praise." Ted replied, "Tonight we'll find out how amazing grace is." Well, when the cook arrived, Ted started playing. She didn't want a paying customer to enter without music that night. She hadn't had time to plan any particular repertoire. She just played whatever she felt. She played hope. She played thanksgiving. She played disappointment. She played fear. She played freedom. She played for Mamie. She played for Dan and the guys who moved the piano. She played for the neighborhood. She played for the whole city. She played Gershwin and she played gospel, Brubeck and blues. And when Dan showed up with a beat-up, scarred piano bench under his arm, she played Stardust for him. There wasn't any trouble at the club that night. Nobody got angry. Nothing was broken, nothing thrown, nothing stolen. And Ted played her heart out, and the neighborhood knew that. As people arrived at your place that night, alone or with others, young or old, stranger, friend, they seemed to hear the music that they needed to hear. Some listened quietly, pensively. Others chatted with the other people around the table. Some laughter interrupted now and then, but Ted didn't mind. She could perceive a sense of community growing where once there'd been nothing but a vacant lot. "This is working," she announced to herself. "Thank God this is working." Your place was made safe and secure that night. In their coming and going, people felt free to be good neighbors. At your place, people became one, because one had played from the heart, and one had been a teacher, and one had sacrificed something dear, and one had had hope. Around the tables, people broke bread, told stories, shared joy. Some people even danced. And one boy approached Ted, and as she was playing, he said, "Will you teach me to play like that?" When Ted confessed to Mamie Warfield that she was feeling a little bit guilty about keeping the piano much longer than she'd planned, Mamie said she had her own confession to make. "Ages ago, when you started your first lessons, I told the Lord I'd make this your piano if you lived up to the promise I heard in your music. I suppose the time has come to turn it over to you. But you wouldn't mind my hobbling down the street now and then when the Spirit moves so I can play?" Ted's music poured over this room full of people, somehow putting to death the barriers that separated them and reminding them all of what they had in common: neighborhood, community, family, all signs that grace continued to amaze. And that, as the theologian Hans Kung put it, the Spirit is at work where the Spirit wills. Not just in the holy city either, but in any city. And not just in church, but in the whole world. It was as if a cup of cold, clear, refreshing water had been offered in the desert. In the Message, Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of the Bible, he's paraphrased the first verse of today's psalm lesson this way: "Your love, God, is my song, and I'll sing it." And that moved me to think God's love is our music, and we must play it. This is a story about the power of music. Yes, it's a story about community, but it's also a story about discipleship, about how one musician passes on the gift of music to the next. And a child might just as well have asked, "Will you teach me to pray that way?" Once upon a time, a little imagination turned emptiness into life abundant. And so we follow Jesus, singing his songs of steadfast love and faithfulness. And with imagination and with feeling from the heart, we too shall build community and glorify God with our music and with our words and with our lives.